I've been so stuck in my head that I forget just about everything my therapist said. Maybe I'm self-helpless.
Hey everyone, welcome to Self-Helpless. I'm Delaney Fisher, and today I'm chatting with Dr. Judy Ho, who is a licensed clinical and forensic neuropsychologist. She's also a tenured professor at Pepperdine University, and you may have seen her on several different TV shows like The Doctors, Dr. Phil, Face the Truth. She's often a panelist, host, expert guest. And today we are talking about attention-seeking behavior. And while there's a lot of different kinds of attention-seeking, like instigating arguments, fishing for compliments, embellishing stories, or one upping. And of course, the levels of how destructive these behaviors are to someone and their life and the people around them vary greatly. Today, we are focusing on the behavior of sympathy seeking. So, we're discussing what's at the root of attention seeking behaviors, what a healthy or unhealthy amount of attention seeking looks like. And Dr. Judy gives a lot of practical tips for approaching a conversation with someone who is exhibiting these behaviors. She also gives great advice for parents as well. I know that so many of you are concerned with the role that social media now plays in attention seeking. So, yeah, we covered a lot of ground today. And this topic of sympathy seeking was voted on by our Patreon community. So, thank you for voting and participating in that. And just a heads up, this information is not meant to demonize anyone who struggles with this kind of behavior. We all have maladaptive coping mechanisms, or we have all had them at some point. Nobody is perfect. This conversation is to bring awareness to this from all sides in order to help us strengthen our relationship with ourselves and each other. So, here is my conversation with Dr. Judy Ho. What is attention seeking behavior? And I guess within that category, what is sympathy seeking specifically?
Yeah, attention seeking or sympathy seeking is thought of, depending on the person who's expressing it, as a way to maybe even exaggerate or make up certain issues or problems in one's life so that they can garner all the support that they can have at any given time. And so
Okay.
it can manifest in a lot of different ways. Sometimes people, this is kind of just their first thing out of the box when they talk to anybody, is start getting into their own problems and wanting people to help them. But sometimes it's more like taking attention away from someone else's conversation. So maybe someone else is talking about something that
Oh.
they're going through and they're saying, "Hey, me too." But instead of just saying "me too," so that the person says, "Oh, okay, I'm not alone in this," then they just delve into their own saga and essentially take away from that person's focus and conversation.
Okay, gotcha. And I'm assuming if somebody has this, I guess, coping mechanism of sympathy seeking, that they also have real significant things that happen in their lives too, right? And then also they maybe inflate or exaggerate things that maybe are more minor. And so how can somebody on the other, like the receiving end of that, start to realize, I don't know if this is as serious as this person is making it sound.
If somebody's going through something, I mean, there could be days, weeks, or months where they're really entrenched in it, but you know that that's not their usual way of
Right.
talking with you or interrelating with you. When it becomes almost their predominant MO, that's when you're saying, okay, there might be something else going on where this person just needs sympathy, needs attention, needs support all the time. And I think this is somewhat related to another concept I talk to a lot of my friends and colleagues and patients about, which is this idea of emotional vampires.
Mm,
And I did not make up that term. I think I heard it somewhere else, but I just thought that that makes so much sense where you have
yeah.
a person in your life that's just constantly sucking energy and resources from you. And
Right.
in a good relationship, I think it goes back and forth. But if it becomes very one sided, and when you're looking at the history of your relationship with that person, it seems to be the predominant pattern, that's when you know, hey, there might be something else going on here.
Right. And what are some other attention seeking behaviors?
Yeah, so sometimes it's exaggerated stories, exaggerated even achievements, sharing or embellishing certain aspects of their life, wanting to get a reaction, a specific reaction from you before they'll stop talking about it. As we already
Mm,
talked about, constantly sharing of personal problems, except that every time they share it, it feels like it's a crisis. So
right.
crises, unfortunately, of course, sometimes somebody's going through a phase and it feels like everything's happening one after the other. But again, if it's a long-term pattern and every time they have a problem, it's a crisis. You need to deal with it now. Please text me back. Please call me back. That is another form of that type of attention seeking. Also, interrupting or dominating conversations. So, again, someone else is
Mm.
talking about something, and all of a sudden they're coming in with what happened to them that day, what problem you need to focus on now. Sometimes you even see it more passively, like posting excessively on social media, hoping that one of their friends will see it and then contact them and say, "Hey, what's up? Are you okay?" So posting a
Ah,
ton on social media and alluding to different problems that they're going through. Sometimes it can be even as extreme as faking an illness or faking an injury. In clinical terms, if this becomes a big pattern, we actually have a name for it. It used to be called Munchausen's.
right.
Now it's called something slightly different, but most people know it by that Munchausen's label, where essentially, even if they have an illness, they're making it way worse than it is, or maybe they're just faking one. Sometimes they'll seek validation through compliments, so acting insecure about something and just basically waiting. It's like baiting for you to say, "Oh no, you look great in that dress," or "No, you know that you're smart," and they're just waiting for that type of response. And then I guess in general, just playing the victim, in every situation, instead of taking personal responsibility, it's always about how someone wronged you. Instead of
Mm.
saying, okay, you know what, there's two sides to this. They were very mean to me, but at the same time, I was very mean to them. They don't really talk that way. It's always about, well, why does this always happen to me? And that's a usual term that they'll use.
And what is the term, what is the new term for Munchausen's or formerly Munchausen's? Just curious.
Munchausen's in the DSM now is called, there's two different ones. So if you're faking illness or feigning injury in yourself, it's called factitious disorder
Okay.
imposed on self. And then if it's faking injury in another person, like a child or someone you're caring for, it's called factitious disorder imposed on others.
Okay, and that used to be
Yeah.
Munchausen by proxy or something, right?
That's called Munchausen
Okay.
by proxy when it's another
Okay.
person. Yeah, and I think they
Wow.
probably changed the term because Munchausen's has become such a loaded term,
Yeah.
and it's been used and weaponized in all kinds of situations that they're trying to name it something else. I'm not sure if it's that cleverly disguised though, because
Right.
factitious disorder means fake. Munchausen's, at least you're not exactly sure what Munchausen is if you've never heard of it, but once you say factitious, I
Right.
mean, if you have a dictionary, you know that that means fake.
It's definitely easier to understand this way with the new term. I don't know if that's
Right.
good for the person getting the diagnosis, necessarily, but,
Exactly.
so, I mean, like everything else, I'm assuming that this coping mechanism stems from childhood, right? Like, that sympathy seeking worked at some point with a caregiver to gain the attention or love that they needed. Can you share a little bit about the root of this behavior?
Yeah, so I think it comes predominantly from a couple of different childhood experiences. One
Okay.
is a child who's literally never gotten any attention.
Mm,
They're always the neglected one, at least that's their perception, whether that's real or not. And as they grew into adulthood, they started to learn that, okay, well, I have to invent or exaggerate my crises so that people will pay attention to me. Another way this could happen, though, is if they get really stuck on what I call an illness identity. So maybe they were sick as a child at some point, whether that's a mental or physical illness. And they realize that at those moments, they were oddly also the most happy because most people would congregate around them. They would be first priority. Parents are really devoting a ton of attention, and they actually got used to that early on. So then,
mm.
even as they were an adult, even as those illnesses subsided or maybe started to get better, it's almost like they can't really let go of it. And they start to make up more and more symptoms that make it seem like they're still suffering from that illness or maybe a completely new one. It can sometimes come from trauma. So, like if a person has been through extremely traumatic situations, it's quite easy for them to have this perception that the world is against them all the time and that they are truly the victim. That requires a lot of processing, going to therapy, just working through all of those traumas that they may have pushed away. And then finally, I think it's also modeling, maybe watching a parent or caregiver, even an older sibling, act in these ways, getting attention, and they adopted that because as children, we soak up everything around us. So, especially those who we look up to in some way, like our parents or like our older siblings. And if they're doing something, then, oh, that must be the way to solve all of life's problems.
Right. And it's interesting if it's kind of normalized in the family dynamic, right? Whether it's the family, they kind of use sympathy seeking as a coping mechanism, or they're always on the other end of it and they're maybe
Right.
people pleasing. It can be hard for somebody to realize that there's other ways of being, that they don't have to be doing those things. So from your experience, how do people usually find out that maybe something they're doing is maladaptive and they realize it's kind of a family issue that they can either participate in or try to, individuate from?
Yeah, I think it really does take some introspection, which is never comfortable. Like if people think that doing therapy or any kind of inner work is all about awesome positive things. It's just not true. It's very painful to look back in the past sometimes and to think about how you were treated and to think about ways in which you might want to change certain behaviors that you learned as a child. I think that it takes a huge amount of self compassion. So just knowing that
Mhm.
generally when you develop a certain type of coping style, it's because you were trying to survive that moment in your life. And as a child, of course, you have less resources, things are a lot more concrete. So you don't really think big picture, you're just thinking about like how can I deal with this now, right?
Yeah.
And as an adult we end up just adopting that into a general pattern, but it's important not to be so critical of yourself when something like that happens. I think it is important to know that that is just the way that humans are primed because we're trying to survive.
Yeah.
And I think if you can think about it from that angle, it makes it slightly easier to do that type of work, because even if you discover things you don't like about yourself, just viewing it from a survivalist lens will hopefully give you just a little bit of that forgiveness for yourself. Um,
Yeah.
to be able to then like really dig deep and say, okay, well, if I don't like this and I don't want this to be my predominant coping strategy anymore, what's one small thing that I can start shifting to start moving in the right direction? Because then it can feel really overwhelming. Like, well, I can't change the way that I've been this entire time.
Mhm.
So I think it's important to know that incremental steps is very crucial, and that
Yeah.
that is really the way to lasting change. If you really want to change for good, you can't just change 20 things at once. Your brain literally will not be able to handle it. It will interpret that as a threat, like a fight or flight response. So you
Right.
do have to kind of slowly challenge yourself, and knowing that's kind of that is a huge step towards progress, and honoring yourself anytime you're able to make one of those commitments.
Yeah, that is such a great point that you shared of just looking at like this was a survival mechanism. I'm not a bad person because I'm doing XYZ behavior. And that really takes that kind of like emotional charge out of it. And at some point it did work.
Yeah,
Like it worked
it
well
did the
for
job.
you. It did the job. And now it's maybe not working so well and you want to try something else. Before we get into the shifts that people can make if they find themselves trying to seek sympathy, or being on the receiving end of it quite a bit. What are some examples of sympathy seeking types of behavior or even dialogue that can pop up in everyday situations, whether, with a friend, family member, colleague? What are some typical ones that you've noticed?
Some of the most common ones might be, well, I guess no one really cares about me. Saying
Mm,
statements like that, so that of course your response will then be, well, I really care about you, and then it's sort
right,
of that type of conversation where then they become the focus of the attention.
right.
Or even saying things that are slightly passive aggressive, like, it's okay, I'm used to being alone anyways, don't worry about it.
Mm,
Right? It's like, no, don't worry. But their body language, their words are saying, don't worry, but they're actually saying, I want you to feel guilty for not being here for me. Right?
right.
It's actually an indirect attack on your not being a supportive person to them. Or like saying things that seem really helpless, like, I don't know why bad things always happen to me. It doesn't happen to anyone else. Why is it happening just to me? I think that that is a really common one as well. Again, just really needing to always put yourself in a position where you don't have a way out, because once you tell yourself that over and over again, you're not going to be empowered for change too, right? So that's a really crucial one that people need to shift. Or just saying things like, I feel like a burden all the time. That may be true to some extent. Your friends and family might say, oh gosh, yeah, actually you're always complaining, but
Mm,
almost like calling it out and then making people feel bad about it. Or like when good things happen to other people, not being able to be happy for them and just saying things like, wow, must be nice to have someone who loves you. Or like, wow, nice to be able to have actual accomplishments that you're proud of. It's like a backhanded compliment.
Yeah.
where basically they're bringing the attention back to them again. And of course, the subtext is, well, I've never experienced that.
Yeah, interesting that you brought up the, I guess, would it be considered cognitive dissonance of I'm saying that I'm aware that I'm burdening you with all my issues, but I'm still doing it also simultaneously. That's an interesting thing because I think somebody who maybe isn't sure what to look for in this way might say, "Oh, this person's really self-aware. They can't be seeking sympathy in like a maladaptive way or whatever because they said that I'm aware I'm complaining a lot, or I'm aware that I'm a burden right now, or something. So that is an interesting thing people can kind of look out for. What about if somebody is doing this, but they're not really stating? Somebody might not be saying, "Oh, everything bad happens to me," or "I can't catch a break." What if they're just calling you about every little thing that's going on with them, or every time that you're talking to them at the water cooler, so to speak, at work, it's always something negative, but they're not even maybe aware that they're being negative consistently. Is that also considered sympathy seeking?
Yeah, and I think that they may not even realize the impact that they're having because it is a little more subtle. People might not directly call them out on it,
Right.
but they're just draining other people's emotions and time still. I mean, I would think about as a position of somebody who loved this person or who cared about this person. It's worth gently pulling them aside and saying, like, hey, like sometimes you do this, you walk into a conversation, we're talking about something else, and then all of a sudden it's about you. And it's not necessarily interpreting that behavior, it's just describing it and then saying, have you noticed it? Or like, why do you think that is? Essentially, then like asking them to respond as opposed to saying, well, I don't know why you're always hogging the attention, because then that's an interpretation of what they're doing. Right.
Oh,
But it's more
interesting.
just
Yeah.
calling out the behavior like, hey, I've noticed that the last few times we're in the middle of a conversation, you come in, you start talking about what's going on with you. What's going on? I mean, it can be so neutral, like in the way
Yeah.
that you present it. But I think sometimes people truly don't understand or truly don't know. Other times, maybe they do know and no one's calling them out on it, so just keep doing it, right? But the
Yeah.
most important thing, I think, to try to get people to look at their own behavior without getting defensive, because the minute you interpret it, right? I mean, we all know how this goes in an argument. Like,
Right.
immediately you go on the defense. So you don't want to
Right.
interpret it as saying, like, hey, I know you're trying to get attention. It's more just, hey, this keeps happening. Why is that? What's going on with you? Like, and sometimes you can get to the bottom of it a lot quicker and hopefully you start reducing that behavior.
Okay, so asking somebody questions, are there anything else that could help bring someone's attention to this behavior in a kind way? That was a great example. Maybe that's just the one to always pull out, but anything else on that front?
One of the things that is really important to know is that it probably comes from a place of pain.
Yeah.
So I think even just orienting yourself to that compassion for them will make that conversation just go better no matter what words come out of your mouth, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's coming from a place of pain. They're not just being manipulative for no reason. They're not just, trying to the conversation for no reason. Something that could also help, call out their own verbal responses, almost like repeating verbatim or summarizing or paraphrasing it so that they can even hear back what they're saying. So maybe
Mm,
like, hey, I've noticed that you often been expressing that you feel really alone.
mm,
Or I notice sometimes you're talking about how you feel like the world is against you. Like, literally try to use their words or summarize what they're saying so that, again, it's not an interpretation, it's just a reflection back. And then after that, say, how can I best support you? Or what do you need? And what do you need right now? Is there anything I can do? Um, Sometimes that can be effective because then you're directly addressing potentially the root of why they're doing it. Like, okay,
right.
you're saying all these things, like, what can I do to help you? And if they're able to articulate what it is that they need, that may also reduce their behavior without you even needing to call it out any other way. And if you think about it in some ways, how a child expresses themselves when they're in distress, right? And sometimes when we are feeling distress, we start to like act like children, even as adults.
Yeah.
When a child is having a tantrum, there's something underneath. They're not just tantruming for no reason. It's just like they don't have the words to express it, or they don't have like the emotional understanding to know that it's because they're sad and that's why they're acting this way. And so sometimes it's really helpful just to even imagine them as an innocent child and like, let me break this down very simply and just ask them directly what they need. And then if it's in my power and time to do it, I'll do it.
So good. Approaching it with compassion and curiosity and totally makes sense that you're gonna get a better result usually. Let's say that somebody's tuning in and they've done that for a loved one or a coworker, and the behavior is still continuing. At what point should somebody say, "You know, I've done everything that I can. I kind of spoke to this person," and what would be next? Do they have to set some kind of other boundary? Do they keep repeating what they've said? What have you seen work really well in a situation like that?
Yeah, well, I think that in general, the things that I've seen to really work well is if the person truly feels that it's coming from a place of care and love, because ultimately that's where all of this is coming from, is that they
Right.
don't feel cared for, they don't feel loved. And when you're in distress, something really bears repeating because you don't really hear it the first time because you're in the middle of your own thoughts, or you're stressed out and you're not emotionally regulated.
Mm,
And so I think even repeating a couple of times in the conversation, like, I really care about you. Like, you mean a lot to me. You're important to me. It's may sound like a broken record, but sometimes people need to hear it more than once, especially if at first they're not attending to that information. I
yeah.
also think that it tends to go well if you can close out that conversation with a mini bonding ritual. So what I mean by that is it's something to kind of reset the relationship so that they know that just because you had this conversation, or that maybe you were a little displeased or annoyed by their behaviors, that it's still all good, you know?
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean that you're like, okay, now let's go out for a fancy lunch. We don't all have time and money for that. But it's more just like after having the conversation, like directing it back quickly to another conversation that's just pleasant, that's like happy, like, oh, like let's talk about what we want to do this weekend. Or, oh,
Right.
so you were talking about your new date. Like, tell me more about him. Like, so it's just something that shows them that, hey, no hard feelings. We're still in a good place. You and I are okay. And sometimes all that really takes is a brief question about something else that shows that you're interested in their life,
Mm,
planning an activity that you guys were going to do or might want to do, or even something physical like a hug, like grabbing their hand if that's something that you usually do, right?
yeah.
Just to let them know that things are good. Like, and that also is normalizing the fact that when we have relationships with people, arguments and disagreements are part of it. Like when people tell
Right.
me things like, I never have an argument with this partner, that might be true and reflective of how good their relationship is. But to me, that almost reflects, because we're all human with different desires and personalities, that like something's not being talked about, that they're
Mm,
just sweeping something under the rug because
yeah.
you're not going to always agree with your friends, even your
Right.
friends, like sometimes they're going
Right.
to say something that's going to make you annoyed. And I think that it's important just to even normalize that, hey, we can disagree, we can have arguments, we can, talk sometimes in a way that feels like one person feels hurt by the other, and then we're still going to be okay 10 minutes after that.
And I think people know if somebody would be able to hear something like this and take it to heart versus, maybe somebody that they would love to say something like this to, maybe it's not the safest person to, right? Like maybe they've seen the reactions to something like this in the past. Just using that discernment, right? Because not everybody is going to kind of maybe take this well. Is there anything that somebody might need to kind of check in with themselves about if they think saying something like this is even worth maybe the aftermath of what kind of conflict it can cause, based on maybe a personality trait or something like that.
Yeah, one of the things that you have to check with yourself is, how important is this relationship to you?
Yeah,
Sometimes we hold on to people in our lives because we somehow just feel like we owe it to them, or we have to, or because of the longevity or history of the relationship. And I think that it's important to know that sometimes a friend or a person is in your life for a season, or
mhm,
maybe they're only close to you for a season. I mean, you can still be acquaintances with them, but maybe they're not best friends anymore, and maybe that's also okay.
yeah,
So I think the really first good question is like, is this important? Is this really important to work on this relationship, or am I okay kind of letting it lie and not being super close with them, and then that won't bother me so much, right? Um, and then I think once you've decided that yes, this relationship is important to me, it's worth preserving, it's a close relationship, then you have to remind yourself that if you that it's not really about how many friends you have, or how long the friendship is, or how long that relationship is. It's about the quality of the relationship. That's what
yeah.
really drives the positive mental health and connection benefits that we all need as humans. It's almost self-serving in a way too. Like, how do I make this relationship worth my time and helpful for my mental and physical health? Is to try to improve the relationship. And
Right.
sometimes that means me looking at my behavior. Sometimes it means they're looking at their behavior. Sometimes it's both of us. But that should be the motivator, right? Like, hey, it's going to be beneficial not only for them, but for me too. Like everyone wins. It's a
Yeah.
win-win scenario. And oftentimes what I learn from people is that if they've held on to resentment for a long time or something unspoken, it actually really taxes their nervous system. Every time that they interact with this person, like everything goes right up, like the fight or flight immediately goes up. You're already expecting them to say something that's going to upset you. That's obviously not beneficial. And so, really, to achieve those benefits of a great relationship, it's important to clear the air because so many people will tell me afterwards, oh my gosh, what a sigh of relief. I just feel like there's like a big weight that came off of my shoulders. And that's what to look forward to for a short period of discomfort. And then I would say the last tip is it's helpful to think about what you want to say in advance and maybe even write it down a couple of bullet points, especially if you're kind of a visual or tactile learner. Because once you get in the conversation, it's like, oh, like all the stuff that I kind of thought of now is not coming out right. It could be really helpful to just write down 3 or 5 points that you really want to get across in this conversation. And the sandwich technique works really well for difficult conversations. And what I mean by that is, start with something neutral or positive, insert the issue that you wish to be solved. So that's kind of like the not so great feedback, negative feedback.
Yeah.
And then at the end, insert something positive again. So it could literally take the form of, you know, our relationship is really important to me. And that's why I'm bringing this up. That could be like your first point. The
Yeah.
second point is sometimes I feel like you often start talking about your problems in the middle of us having a conversation about something else. And then the last piece could then be something positive again. Like, I really want us to find some ways to work through why this is happening because I love you and I want to continue to feel really close to you. It makes it
Mhm.
easier for people because the last thing that they heard, they can't get defensive about, right? Because usually you're responding to the last thing that you heard. Like, as the person saying
Mm.
something negative about you, you're like, oh, well, I'm going to tell them this.
Right.
Right. So as you're giving them that middle part, the sandwich part of the feedback, they're like starting to gear up for that. But then like when you say, but I just love you so much and I really want us to be close, it's a lot harder to come back with something when their most recent thing was, oh, but I just want us to be better, you know?
Yes,
Yeah.
so good. I love the sandwiching. That question that you said, how important is this relationship to you? That's such a great, just quick, like litmus test almost of like, all right, am I okay with like letting this fizzle or maybe evolve into something different? Or would I like to maybe try to repair what's going on? And either one is okay, right? Like,
Right.
how does sympathy seeking relate to a topic you've written a whole book about, which is attachment theory, attachment styles? Are there any relationships to that that could be interesting for people?
Yeah, for sure. I think that sympathy seeking often is a behavior that people with anxious attachment will exhibit, and to a degree, disorganized attachment too. So, people who have anxious attachment, they oftentimes don't feel like people care about them. And they come up with different ways to try to get people to care. And one of those ways is actually excessively caretaking another person. So they can become very codependent with people, try to rescue other people from their problems because then it's like, hey, they need me. They can't get rid of me. And like, if I'm taking care of all of their problems, they can't break up with me or they can't stop being my friend. But
Mm,
I think the opposite end of that spectrum for people with anxious attachment is to try to find some way to make it about themselves so that people won't leave them.
mm,
So, really pulling for sympathy, acting like you can't do anything without the other person so that they can't leave you. But of course, both ways are a little coercive, right? It's like you're having relationships with people, but there's all these conditions. And at the end of the day, you're always going to be wondering, do they really love me for me? Right. So that's a very common type of behavior that people with anxious attachment might exhibit because they want to keep people close to them. They don't trust themselves. And there's these two main tactics that they use.
yeah.
With disorganized attachment, it can happen because people with disorganized attachment oftentimes grew up with a lot of trauma and stress. So they're used to their life always being in chaos, and they're actually a little bit more comfortable with that because it's just what they know.
Mm,
So they will oftentimes invent crises or chaos because, again, it's almost like that saying the devil you know is better than the devil you don't, right? So it's this idea of, well, at least I know how to manage chaos. So I'm just going to keep creating chaos in my life. And
yeah.
then it can feel a lot like they're sympathy pulling, but so much of it is just that they feel more comfortable if they're in a situation that is chaotic.
It's interesting because, somebody might be tuning in thinking, "Well, I'm not the one seeking sympathy all the time," but it's interesting that they could be utilizing another person in order to gain sympathy. Like, maybe it's not about their problems, but the other person's, like, issues, right? Like, so that could be a thing where you might not resonate with talking about your own personal stuff, but maybe somebody else's, and that's doing something for you. And
Right.
then there's like self-neglect going on because you're so focused on somebody else's situation. Can that kind of tie in with another topic you've written a book about with self-sabotage? Is that similar or different to maybe what we're talking about with that dynamic of sympathy seeking with somebody else?
Yeah, it's definitely related because oftentimes people, when they start to neglect their own needs so much, not only does resentment build towards the people that you're over caretaking of, you also start to lose sight of what it is that you want, your own desires, your own identity, who you are outside of addressing everybody else's problems. And so it
Mm.
can lead to an inadvertent self sabotage because you end up not making progress on your own goals, on your own wellness, and the more that you prioritize other people over yourself, you're sending a repeated message to your brain, which is that I'm not as important as other people. And that
Yeah.
obviously will then affect self esteem, self concept, all kinds of things that relate to how you see the world, how you relate to people, how you even go about goals, how much you actually believe that you can achieve the goals that you put yourself in. That I think is so, so important. But people oftentimes don't realize that that's actually one of the essentially side effects of being this like savior or caretaker of people.
Interesting. I'm curious about the relationship to self because let's say somebody has this sympathy seeking kind of tendency. I would imagine that is also internalized, right? Like, let's say that maybe they only got love and attention when they were sick. So they either tried to get sick all the time or they faked it all the time with a parent or something like that. Does that mean that they maybe only show themselves or like mostly show themselves love and care and affection when they're sick? Just by themselves at home, and they're not caring for themselves every day.
Yeah, it's almost like the self neglect even without an audience.
Right,
I think that in some ways it fits with that victim narrative. Like when they do get sick, it's like, oh, there's nothing I can do to make this better. Or like, I deserve to suffer anyway. Like, I don't deserve to eat well. I don't deserve to exercise. I don't deserve to give myself medicine. I mean, I've definitely seen that. It's almost like a self wallowing of the pain, right? So when nobody is around, it's not so much. I mean, part of it might be, well, wait till my husband, mom, etc., comes home and see how bad of a state I'm in. Maybe there's something like that going on, and even somewhat subconsciously. But I think the other piece is that self neglect and that dependency on others becomes very real. They start to tell themselves a narrative that they can't take care of themselves and nothing matters anyway, or I don't deserve to feel better. And all of that can make the cycle so much worse because they literally won't believe that if they do anything, things are going to get any better.
mm. Let's say that somebody's tuning in right now and they are realizing that they try to gain sympathy as a coping mechanism for themselves. And again, no judgment. What could they start to do to, well, maybe even audit their behavior to like really understand that maybe this is what's going on? But also, how can they maybe shift their way of thinking and doing things when the urge comes up to sympathy seek? What could they do instead?
Yeah, I love this question because it's the idea of like, can we self audit? Can we introspect and see that this is what we're doing? Because maybe as you're listening to this, you're like, this is not really me, is it? um,
Right.
but I think it is important to pause and just reflect on your intention, just in general, as you're interacting with people. Are you hoping to connect with people? Are you hoping to be understood? That might be okay if that's your true goal. But if you notice that actually one of the underlying goals is that you're looking for pity or to be validated by other people as opposed to being able to validate and affirm yourself, or to try to get attention in some indirect way without just saying, I need you right now. I need you to focus on me. That you feel embarrassed about doing that, but you're finding some other way to still grab that from people, but kind of in a manipulative way. You do have to ask yourself, are those any parts of my intention? Right? It might not be the full intention, but if it is some of it, then that means that maybe your behaviors do need to be changed. I also think that it's
Right.
important to notice your own language. or your own body language, both verbal and body. Like,
Mhm.
do you tend to use really dramatic and vague and extreme and self-deprecating statements like always and never and like crises and um basically making everything so black and white all the time, because of course life isn't really like that. So if you
Right.
notice that in general you're more dramatic in your behaviors or your language, that might be another sign. And then I think it's also important to reflect on the aftermath. So after an interaction where you might be attention seeking, do you actually truly feel closer to the person, like you've improved your relationship over time? Or do you really just only feel temporarily better, but then like 10 minutes later, a day later, you're just needing more and seeking more of that validation?
Oh, that's a really great question.
So I think those 3 sets of reflections will definitely give you a sense of where you are with this behavior. And then
Right.
I think to shift, the first thing is just to identify your need, because you may not have even been in touch with that. So it's like, what do I actually need in this moment? What is it that I need? Do I need love? Do I need a hug? Do I need somebody to tell me everything's going to be okay? You have to get really clear on what your needs are before an interaction. And
Mhm.
oftentimes, if it's possible, you then directly request that from a person that you trust instead of going into a long winded, conversation and trying to make everything bigger than it is. Sometimes all you need to say to a person is, I just need you to hug me right now.
Yeah.
Or like, I know you're busy right now, but after work, can you come over? Like, I feel lonely, right? We have to start getting confident in just saying what it is that you need, because then you're going to get it quicker too. I mean, it's going to serve you, it's going to serve them. There's no guesswork. But I also think that a really important part to shift your behaviors is to work on your own self soothing, right? Because if you find that you're utilizing attention seeking or sympathy seeking behaviors, it's because you don't trust yourself to calm yourself down or to make yourself feel better. So a big part of this is going to be you learning, well, what makes me feel good? What really makes me feel good that I can do on my own in case people aren't available, or just because I want to prove to myself I can do it sometimes on my own. And for everybody, it's different. For some people, it's like, okay, maybe just taking a walk around the neighborhood, clearing my head. For other people, it might be, well, distract myself with one of my hobbies. That kind of makes me feel engaged, right? But it doesn't have to be something monumental. It can be things that you do in 5 or 10 minutes, but after you do them, you notice a shift in like your confidence and the way that you're feeling.
That self-soothing is so important, and I loved what you said, like, let's say that somebody is, trying to gain sympathy with an hour and a half phone call with a friend, and they're hoping this mind reading situation happens where the other person offers, "Oh, well, I should come over tonight and sit with you," versus it could just be a 1-minute question, "Hey, I'm feeling lonely, would you mind coming over?" Same result could happen with that directiveness, which I love, versus just hoping people do what you're wanting them to do. I feel like, we with social media, it seems like we are in the age of attention seeking. It's normalized, it's being rewarded with likes and follows and all these things. So, how can we collectively be aware when we're seeking attention, in a healthy way or a grounded way versus when it's becoming maybe detrimental?
Yeah, I feel like self-worth is such a big part of this, because I
Yeah.
think oftentimes people start to couch all of their worth on like the validation they're getting from other people. And it is really important that people build their self-worth outside of sympathy or attention-seeking behaviors. Like, who am I outside of that? And
Right.
their value isn't based on how much people worry about you, how many people are calling you. Like, none of that actually matters. It's really just about what you believe about your own strengths and contributions. And every human being has worth no matter what we do. It's
Yeah.
not really tied to our behaviors, the number of friends that we have. Like, your worth is your worth, and nobody can touch that. And I know that that sounds easy when we're just saying it as a concept. Of course, it's much harder to do, but that's why it is important to build your self worth outside of achievement based things. Like, oftentimes people will
Yeah.
say, well, I'm worth this because I do this. It's like, well, but what is your worth outside of doing anything? What about just your value system? Like, you have worth because you believe in integrity, or you have worth because you believe in honesty. You have worth because you're a human being, and all human beings are worthy. Even starting with affirmations, it's just a different way of changing your thought process and breaking up the thoughts that are in there right now, because right now it might be on some kind of negative loop about how unworthy you are. And so
Mm.
even just starting the day off by reading an affirmation like, I'm worth it, or I'm good enough, or I'm enough for myself. Like, just something so simple, but if you just read that a few times a day, it helps so much because that eventually makes its way into your subconscious and it'll be quicker than you think. I mean, literally within a few days of a ritual like this, you'll just
Yeah.
notice that you feel better about yourself. And also things that really affirm that you do have the power to change. We all have the power to change no matter how old we are, how long we've been entrenched in a negative pattern because of neuroplasticity. This is that idea that your brain is constantly evolving and you can constantly update the software, essentially,
Yeah.
even as you get older. So some people will say, well, I heard that the brain isn't as plastic when you're older, 40, 50, 60. Actually, the brain is plastic until you die. I mean,
Wow.
do you have a little bit less neuroplasticity at age 90 versus age 30? Yeah, but it's still plastic. I mean, that's the crazy thing. It's plastic until you die. You're always evolving until our time on earth has come to an end. And so it's just important to remind yourself of that and that whatever you feed your brain, it's going to become the truth. It's going to become the reality.
That is so fascinating. And do you think it's helpful? Let's say that somebody is becoming aware when they get the urge to like sympathy seek, I guess, right? Like, do you think it's helpful for them, even if they don't truly feel like it, maybe asking somebody a question about their weekend instead, or complimenting somebody, like just kind of doing the opposite of pulling focus to them for a while to build a habit? Or do you think sharing their feelings is the way to go? Because could that become a different version of sympathy seeking if they're always like, "I'm sad and I'd like you to come over," right? Like,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
there is there a
Yeah.
happy balance, happy
Yeah, I
medium?
think that yeah, it's such a good question. I mean, I think the happy balance is also remembering that sometimes you should be calling your friend to ask them how they're doing. And
Right,
that's your agenda, right?
right.
It's like, okay, like my agenda today is just to call them and say, "How you doing?" Just wanted to let you know I'm thinking about you. I mean, you don't have to have an agenda like other than just wanting to check in on them. Like yesterday I called a friend who I hadn't talked to in a couple weeks. She's one of my best friends and like I really felt that passage of time like, "Oh, it's been a couple weeks since we've checked in, texted or called." So I just picked up the phone and called her and I'm like, "Hey, I'm just calling to say hi." I was literally just like, "I have 10 minutes and I want to talk to you." And we had a great conversation and nobody was really pulling one thing from the other. We were just kind of catching each other up on our lives. And I felt so much
Right.
better after that, you know? So sometimes it actually makes you feel better, even when you're reaching out to somebody just to check on them and you don't have anything to ask of them. It makes you feel so good afterwards. So a quality interaction doesn't have to have any agenda at all and could be like 5 minutes. I mean, I think I talked to her for 10 minutes max because we're both running to work at the time.
I would love your thoughts on the intersection, I guess, of certain careers and attention that's just kind of built into that career. Like every job has kind of a different level of attention, I guess you could say. For
Yeah.
example, a professor who speaks in front of big groups of students, or a news reporter, a public official, those things that have a certain level of attention built in versus maybe somebody who's doing like, data entry in a finance department with one person that they report to, right? Smaller amount of attention. Um, how can we become aware if we are in a career or pursuing a career because we actually enjoy it versus maybe the type of attention or level of attention it gives us? Is there anything that we can do about that when we think about our work?
Yeah, I think that it's interesting. You know, people sometimes have very sedentary and self-focused jobs where they don't have any real interaction with others. And
Yeah.
then other people will have their job is literally talking to people all day long. And of course, there's also personality and predispositions. Like some people just do better talking to more people throughout the day. Other people actually prefer being alone more of the day. So I
Yeah.
think the first thing is just to take a barometer of like where you are on the spectrum. All of us need connection. That's just a human biological and evolutionary fact because we are social beings for a reason. That's how we survive. But there
Yeah.
obviously are personality differences. Some people like more interaction versus less. And so I think it's just good to check in with yourself sometimes, especially if you have more of an isolated job that like you're building in some kind of connection time with at least one other human being once a day. But I also think that if you're somebody whose job already pulls so much emotional energy from you, sometimes the way you want to be with people when you're off work might not be to have another long conversation. It might
Yeah.
be to share a shared activity together, like doing something together that you're both interested in, or sitting together to watch a TV show or a movie and just physically being next to somebody that you love. And so I think that it is important to kind of know where you're starting from, but also know that we still need connection every day, but that might look different in terms of type of activity, duration of the activity, and how many people are there for the activity. Sometimes people also get really overwhelmed if it's a big group, but they love one-on-one conversation, right? So all of this takes some amount of like really understanding yourself and trying to understand what feels good. And so if you're not 100% sure,
Mm.
experiment with a few of these different combinations. And after the fact, just like rate your feeling, your mood on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the
Yeah,
best mood, one being the lowest. And you'll start to get a read on yourself really fast just by doing those check ins.
absolutely. And do you think it's worth asking yourself, if this job went away for whatever reason, how would that make you feel? The loss of identity or loss of self-worth because of the attention you were getting. If that really hits hard, maybe there's something to work on there versus I think I'd be fine. I would find something different, or maybe some people are pursuing certain paths without realizing why they're doing it. And if the
Yeah.
attention was not part of it, would they still be pursuing that career?
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think that for some people in certain types of careers, they've been doing it for so long that they just assume that it's what they're supposed to be doing as part of their identity. But
Yeah.
maybe it's not. Maybe they're meant to do something else. And I think that it's important to find out whether or not you feel like your career, your job aligns with your top values. So values are not things you can check
Mhm.
off. They're not like goals or things that you want to live your life according to. They're ways that you want to be talked about if you're not in the room and somebody says, "Hey, describe this person to me in a couple of sentences," right? And I think that your job doesn't have to hit all of your top values at all times. I mean, let's say you have a top 3 to 5 values list. It doesn't mean that your job or your career has to hit every single of those top values, but it should hit at least a couple of them for
Yeah,
it to really be something that you should invest in and really um feel like it's fueling your life and adding to it. And it doesn't necessarily always involve a huge career switch. It just might involve a different activity mix. You might still work within the same company, but take on different types of projects or maybe try to get a promotion into a different role. It doesn't necessarily mean moving heaven and earth and changing your entire trajectory. But sometimes if you're feeling like, oh, wow, things are getting really stagnant, or I'm finding myself only living for the weekend, then that's
yeah.
a good time to check in on those things and see if there's anything you can do to improve.
I love the focusing on the values versus even maybe like, "Am I doing this for the right reasons? How do I know?" For the parents who are tuning in, how can they instill healthy attention seeking in their children and help them with those behaviors versus maybe doing something without realizing that that could lead to maybe sympathy seeking and stuff like that as an adult that isn't very helpful for them?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And, with parenting, it's interesting because we all come with our own baggage, things that we really loved about our childhood that we want to replicate in our children, or things that we're like, oh, well, I don't ever want to do that. I did not
Yeah.
like it or appreciate it when that was done to me. It is important to know that your job as a parent, first and foremost, is to raise a healthy, self sufficient, and empathetic human being. In order for them to build resilience, which is going to be a lifelong skill, they're going to have to be disappointed sometimes and they're going to have to learn that things are hard sometimes. And while it will be a huge pull for you to want to meet your child's needs at every turn as soon as they have it, sometimes it is important for them to struggle and figure it out on their own. But for them
Right.
to know that you're there. So it's not so much like, I'm gonna let you struggle and goodbye, but it's more like, well, why don't you try to figure it out? Or like, you'll need to wait 30 minutes. And then if you still haven't figured it out, I'll help you. Or like, why don't you try a few different things, but I'll be by your side? It's really allowing them to start developing that self belief that they can overcome challenges, but
Right.
also still knowing that because they are children, you're still there also. Like, in case they have questions, in case they want to hug afterwards, in case they want to complain to you that was hard, yeah, you're there for that, but you do want them to try. And so I think it's little things like letting them understand rules early, because rules are actually super helpful for kids. They may complain about it in the moment, but that is actually what comforts them, is when they have certain routines that they can trust in, and knowing that there's certain orders and procedures of life. Like, mommy's talking to her friend right now. After we finish the conversation, I can then help you do this. And even some of those things can really help. And also not overly rewarding their sympathy seeking behaviors, right? So not giving in every time they whine about something. When they complain about something and you see that it's not an emergency, saying, okay, well, everything looks okay right now. When mommy has a few minutes, we can put a band aid on it, but that's not necessary at this exact moment.
Mm.
Sometimes it's really important to find that balance, which can be hard, but it's just important to remind yourself that that is actually going to be really key foundation to building a resilient human being. And they are going to be at a point needing to solve problems on their own. And it's important to give them those lessons early while while they're still under your roof.
Yeah. Oh, such great tips for that. Thank you. And what about the people who are on the opposite end of the spectrum with sympathy seeking? I have been told that I kind of have issues with the opposite, where I'll finally catch up with a friend and a response will be, "What? You were going through that? Like, why didn't you call me? You know that you can call me and talk to me about this, right?" Where I maybe have my tendency has maybe I've kept too much in to myself and didn't process with other people, and I really internalize things because maybe of my people pleasing behaviors where I'm not being forthcoming with certain feelings of mine. And I have found that I've improved a lot in this area. And if somebody asks me a question about how I'm feeling, I am way more able to share freely versus if I have to bring a feeling of mine out of nowhere to somebody about something. So, what would your advice be for somebody like me who maybe needs help sharing more often about something that they're struggling with because they're just used to maybe dealing with it by themselves?
Delaney, I totally get you. I feel like we're kindred spirits in this way. As you were speaking, I was like, she's peering into my mind. Um, that's my go-to too. What I've noticed about myself is exactly what you described, where if I'm going through something, you might not hear from me. Like you just might not
Yes.
hear from me. um,
Yeah.
and it wouldn't be fair to my friends. I think that some of my friends, they start to know this about me, like my closest friends, and they're like, we haven't heard from you in a while. You good? And even when they reach out, I still basically I'm just like, I'm just overwhelmed. Like I won't go into it, even
Yeah.
with an invitation sometimes. And I'm working on that myself as well.
Yeah.
So I think that when you're on the opposite side and you're a bit more too self-sufficient, possibly, one, you've been used to that role for parts of your life or all of your life or most of your life. But
Mhm.
two, also there sometimes is this feeling that maybe people aren't going to give you what you need or that you don't want to show some kind of weakness, even if it's on a
Mm.
subconscious level. Like, well, I don't want to be that complainer. I don't want my friends to think that like I'm a big sob story right now, even though there's a lot going on, whatever. And I think that it's important to check that because, those are judgments that we have of ourselves. It's probably likely, especially if you're this kind of person, that your friends would never judge you for this because you're like the opposite. And I think that it's important to start testing, letting a little bit of that vulnerability show with your closest people. It doesn't mean that
Right.
you're changing this behavior overnight. You might always be somebody who plays things a bit more closer to your chest. But just even in some small way saying, yeah, like this part is almost the same, no matter who you are. It's like, what do I need right now? Do I feel like there's one person right now who I'd feel safe communicating that to? And just start really small, right? You don't have to all of a sudden have verbal diarrhea and be talking about yourself for 45 minutes, but it's more like, yeah, actually, I'm feeling overwhelmed. It would be really cool if we did something this weekend together. Like, I would just
Mhm.
like to spend some time with you. That's all I'm asking for. Or it might just be, I have so much on my plate. I hate to bother you, but do you think you can go pick up my dry cleaning for me? Like sometime today or tomorrow? Like I don't have time. It doesn't
Yes.
have to be like something earth shattering. It's just what is one thing that could improve your experience right now? And do you feel safe asking one person to do that for you or with you?
That's the advice I could have used 10 to 15 years ago. And I find that I've definitely grown in that area over time. And I think convenience is also a big thing for me. If I'm walking with a friend or something, I'll share like very freely, but I'm less likely to call somebody out of the blue and tell them what's going on. Well, Dr. Judy, thank you for clearing that up for me. I appreciate it. Is there anything that we didn't cover today that you think is really important that you'd like people to know? And then, of course, where can people find you, your work, your books, all that good stuff?
I love this conversation so much. Thank you so much for having me on your
Yeah, of
podcast.
course.
So everybody can find me on my website, drjudyho.com. I'm on Instagram. I'm also on Substack, where you can subscribe to my free newsletter where I send out free resources every week. So definitely check me out on those platforms.
Thanks for hanging out with Self-Helpless. Feel free to share this with someone who could use it, and you can binge related conversations linked in the show notes. Ad-free episodes are now available on Patreon, and because I'm practically allergic to social media, the best way to get notified about new episodes is to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, or join the email list at selfhelplesspodcast.com, where you will also find some free goodies like a watch and read list and the quote buffet. All right, love you big time, and thank you so much.